obviously a live event. Please don't put personal information into the chat. You can ask questions as if they're about someone else. I see we've already got some questions which have kind of followed that rule, which is great. We're joined tonight by Laura as well, which is awesome. Laura's an admin on Homelessness Best Practice. Oh, Shannon, I can't hear you because you're muted. You're saying something. We right?
We can hear your YouTube playing in the background.
That's weird because there's nothing on. Hold on a sec, guys. Let me just mute a second. Shannon, do you want to do the blurb whilst we're figuring out? Can you still hear it?
It was my end, sorry.
Okay, all good. Okay, we're all good, yeah? Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I'm really confused because I've now learned how to mute everything at the right time. So yeah, Laura's an admin on the Homelessness Best Practice group on Facebook. And yeah, we've known each other for quite some time. We've got some questions that have come in on the chat already, which are fairly in-depth, which is great. There's a question which I want to go to first, which just because I was told the person I would do it first, it's quite an important one. Laura, let us know when you put audio.
Yeah, so, yeah. Can you hear me now? I should have audio.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, I'm reading the message from earlier. That's all good. Yeah, cool. Okay, so and what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try to say a number for the question so that I can then put the questions into a chapter for the recording, so that when you guys watch it back, rather than kind of have to listen to the whole thing. Hang on a minute. So someone's got YouTube like looping. So just everyone turn off their internet browser because I'm hearing it's going around. So yeah, so basically I'm going to try to kind of make it formalized so we can kind of keep track of it and people can just access the question they want the answer to rather than the whole thing. Yeah, I've said it already. Just don't put personal information into the chat, just to kind of keep you guys safe. Really, the live chat will only be visible whilst it's live broadcasting. It won't remain afterwards. So we'll try to read out the question so it makes sense for the audio. A few other bits and pieces. Can't remember what else really. Yeah. Have I missed anything? Oh, well, now yours is echoing.
Sorry, yeah, I was trying to get the stream up so I could see the comments, but I can't seem to turn the volume off it. So I'll look at it. I'll try and look at it over here.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, cool. Right. So first question that we're going to answer, as I say, and I'm going to say, right, number one is a question just basically about domestic abuse. So the question came in on the YouTube comments during the week. It basically was that this person's fleeing high-risk domestic abuse. They've approached the council. They did say which council, but I'm not going to bother naming because it's the same everywhere. And essentially, what the council said they can't help. The answer, and the question is, what can they do in that situation? So, because it's a really important one because it affects a lot of people, it's probably worth going into a bit of detail. I know we've covered similar kind of questions before, and in one sense, there's no single answer really, so it's probably helpful just to kind of reiterate some stuff anyway. So, if I just start off by just giving the kind of bit of groundwork or whatever, bit of foundation. So, and this is something we're actually going to come back to later on if we get time. So domestic abuse, it's defined in the Domestic Abuse Act, and it's basically any type of abuse really that's from an associated person. And this is where I want to iron out later on. We don't need to worry about it for now. So if it's basically someone who is related to you by blood or by marriage, or because you've been in an intimate relationship with them before, or there might be parents of a kid you've got or whatever. So that's the kind of the overall definition. So as I say, any type of abuse that kind of come into that. And the thing that the Domestic Abuse Act did a couple of years back was it meant that effectively, assuming you're eligible for assistance, as in you have recourse to public funds, loosely speaking, if you are homeless, if you are at risk of domestic abuse, you're immediately homeless and you're immediately in priority needs and you can't be intentionally homeless and local connection doesn't really matter. So it's called like a passporting thing, which basically means, if you are at risk of domestic abuse, the council will owe you the main housing duty. They'll take some time to figure that out because they'll have to go through the whole relief duty and stuff, but they should be offering you interim accommodation under Section 188 as soon as you approach them and tell them that you are suffering abuse or at risk of domestic abuse and that you want them to help you out. So I don't know if anyone have I missed anything there, guys? Does that kind of give us a reasonable kind of understanding of where we're at? Yeah, cool. So the question then is, what do you do if a council doesn't help you out? And Will made this point really well last week. He said, in one sense, you can know the council's breaking the law. They could be doing it really blatantly, but that, what can you actually do about it? If you can't stop them doing it, then what good is it to actually know what the law is? And him, as Will is a solicitor, he can, do a lot more than we can with that. So yeah, as I say, I'll kind of, I don't know, I'll sort of start off with the basic stuff that I would be doing if I was supporting someone in the situation, and that is to essentially make an immediate complaint to the Chief Executive Council. I know I say this every time, but it's very effective at achieving the aim, because the council could be breaking the law for a number of reasons. One, it could just be poor training by the housing officer who just has never been trained about this stuff, which is possible. It could also be they're under pressure to gatekeep, and they're gatekeeping and they're kind of knowingly doing it. Or it could be something else. You know, obviously domestic abuse can be complicated, so sometimes it would take time to really establish what's really going on. But the duty under Section 108 is a low threshold. You know, if there's reason to believe that you might be essentially at risk of domestic abuse, when you kind of boil it down, then the council shall offer interim accommodation immediately. And that's not a refuge. You know, they can help you to get a refuge, but that's not, the refuge doesn't discharge the duty. You know, lots of people would turn a refuge down for various reasons, and the council still would have a duty to secure accommodation for them. So yeah, does anyone else want to kind of chip in at this point?
Yeah, I will do, if that's okay. Can anyone hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, I mean, if they're talking that the council aren't helping them, like you said, right at the start, when it is, like you say, a low threshold, it's just reason to believe eligible, homeless and in priority needs. And we know now that domestic abuse is automatically priority need, and it is a low threshold. So I'd be very concerned about this council if they are not doing anything right from the beginning and are not immediately providing interim accommodation, because they should be. And there's a lot of stuff in the Homeless Code of Guidance that can be referred to by an advisor who wanted to help them to just point it all out. I mean, there's, you know, they need to act sensitively. They need to be aware that it might be the first time that the person is reporting the domestic abuse. They don't have to have gone to the police. And the council shouldn't be making judgments on what they should have or shouldn't have done. The council also have to be very, very careful, because with domestic abuse, the time we know from statistics that the time when the person tries to leave is when they're most at high risk. It's serious high risk. So it really concerns me when I hear that councils are kind of not, you know, helping from the beginning and doing the immediate duty of providing interim accommodation. They can make their investigations later, fine, but you know, it only has to be reason to believe. And that person, if they, you know, if they're genuinely fleeing domestic abuse, they've said they are, so there's reason to believe, then they should be accommodating them immediately. And then, you know, then they can make some inquiries, but they need to act really sensitively over this. So yeah, that concerns me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good bit in the LGO report they did, or 2021 now, on domestic abuse, where they said the default position of council should be to believe victims who disclose domestic abuse. And so, and Laura, you just you covered about 5 different paragraphs of the Code of Guidance, which is great. So I think so anyone who just picked up on what Laura just said, if you go to chapter 21 of the Code of Guidance, she's just covered a lot of ground in a very short space of time. So. And all of, you know, and again, just kind of I appreciate for the regulars, this we start repeating ourselves, but the statutory Code of Guidance, although it's called guidance, it's basically legally binding. You know, councils, it's not just like do it if you feel like it's sort of stuff. It's they have to do it. They have to have regard to it as kind of the law. So yeah, I mean, I think there's another kind of few other things that would jump out here, is in that if basically it depends on the detail of the local adult safeguarding policy. So there are some variations between different areas, but most policies will say if a council officer becomes aware of concerns of abuse, they must report those concerns as soon as possible. Now, in one sense, that they've kind of gone under the threshold. That's the wording of the Bedfordshire one as an example. They've gone under that threshold legally because safeguarding duties apply to people with care and support needs who can't take action themselves. But as I say, most policies, most professionals are trained to pick up on reports of abuse immediately and refer them to the safeguarding team, and let the safeguarding team work out whether they hit the Section 42 criteria of the Care Act. So just kind of building on what Laura said, you know, it'd be concerning that council's, first of all, not discharging its housing duties, but it's probably also failing in other areas around adult safeguarding. If there are children involved, then children safeguarding would be the same kind of idea. So all of those, once it's not really good news, but those things are fairly easy to prove if you get a copy of your council's records. because you can show, and this is why it's, this is why it's so important that you're emailing councils rather than going into a customer service center or just ringing them up, because you can prove what you said when, and they would then not be able to prove that they actually followed the law with it. So yeah, anyone else want to say anything on getting a rapid response? Will, as a solicitor, what would you do in that situation? So a client came to you in that situation, I guess it'd be fairly easy for you.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a question of sending a pre-action protocol letter regarding judicial review proceedings, because if the council weren't doing anything and weren't assisting, then you'd give them a warning and then go for a court order requiring them to do so.
Yep. Okay, cool. So again, if you can get a solicitor, then you're onto a winner. It's much more difficult if you can't. But as I say, the reason we kind of do this stuff is that it's definitely possible for lay people to get a lot of good outcomes with this kind of thing. And domestic abuse, in one sense, because the law is so clear, it is quite easy to do so. Much more easy than kind of some other areas of law. This is really kind of clear cut. So yeah. Anyone else want anything into that? Shannon, you got anything?
Yeah, I think also, as well as the writing to the chief exec and all of that, I'd be so concerned about everything else that then happens down the line, because I initially now don't trust this council. I don't trust them to treat this person with any sort of dignity, respect, let alone what they're legally required to do. So I think alongside that email, if I was that client, I would be looking to get some sort of advocate, whether that's someone from a local women's centre. I know a lot of police departments now have domestic abuse sort of subsections that you don't necessarily have to report the abuse, but they'll help with plans and everything else. So, and it could even be a friend. There's someone that can be in the room, so you've sort of got an additional person to back up what they're saying. And to be honest, depending on how sort of the needs are with regards to like their locality and them needing to be in that borough, I'd potentially even be looking to go to a different borough and making a different application somewhere else. But that obviously that's so circumstance dependent. I think, yeah, getting someone there with you throughout the process, and ideally a professional, because unfortunately professionals seem to have more clout than the clients, would be sort of additional steps I think I'd try and take.
Yeah, cool. And yeah, something we haven't mentioned explicitly is the IDVA service, the independent domestic violence advisors. So you access them by some. You can self-refer. If you basically Google the IDVA service or Google MARAC, MARAC, on your council's website, there should be details about how to contact them. And to get an IDVA, you basically fill in a kind of a questionnaire, which seems like really weird, the questions they ask, like, has the perpetrator hit a pet recently, those sorts of things. But it's all research based around kind of assessing what that risk is. And as Laura said earlier, that kind of that point of that person deciding to actually to go and get help and potentially look to move out, that increases the risk significantly. So and IDVAs, again, IDVAs, that's their bread and butter, is supporting people in those circumstances, so they can, there'll be other things that they can get hold of and get assistance for in that situation as well. But yeah, I think, yeah, just to summarize, complaint, unless you can get a solicitor involved, potentially contact councillors, as in elected members, the MP potentially. MPs, again, time and again, I don't find MPs very helpful, to be honest. They sort of just take the council's word at it, that the council's done what they should do. But that should, I would hope that even just a complaint to the chief exec would spur them into action, and they'd actually offer a proper response, and which should be offering you interim temporary accommodation, basically. So yeah, that's question one. Let's go to the chat. So we've got one in, which is about so basically someone who's pregnant, has been in a travel lodge for 8 weeks. It's a London council, and it sounds like they're imminently going to give birth. So very difficult time, I'd imagine, in the circumstance. And essentially, the council's basically said there's nothing they can do. So, and usual kind of stuff like just try and find something private, which is not realistic. And the housing officer most likely knows it's not realistic at that point in time, unless your circumstances are quite unusual. Now, I was just frantically trying to do a bit of stats because I saw the question like a little bit a while ago. I was trying to do some stats. There's a reason why I'm saying this. On the government website, there's these live tables, which is basically like some quite in-depth details, statistics from every council in the country in theory, although some councils seem to get late with submitting them. One of the things they measure is how many families have been in B&B for more than 6 weeks. Well, no, first of all, how many families are in B&B at all, and how many of them have been in B&Bs for more than 6 weeks? And the significance of that is that councils are, first of all, not supposed to use B&Bs at all unless there are exceptional circumstances for families. And if they do have to use them, then they can only do it for 6 weeks. And what that means is that if you are in a B&B and you've got kids or pregnant, so pregnancy would be another situation where you shouldn't be in B&B for more than 6 weeks. You're immediately into the realm of compensation. So it would only be a few £100 probably, but again, that means that straight away you should be looking to run with that complaint, even if you don't do it right now, because obviously this person's going to have a lot on their plate with the upcoming birth. But you'd certainly want to just kind of be making sure everything's in the emails. Potentially request a copy of the records if you've got headspace for it, because it shouldn't happen. And what I was essentially trying to do, sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there. What I was essentially trying to do is, if you kind of get all the local authorities, you kind of rank them by the number of families they've got in that circumstance. So Birmingham's the worst. They've in the first quarter of this year they had 461 families in B&B for more than 6 weeks. And then you've got Redbridge, Ealing, Manchester. I can't find Newham on there, but that's because I'm rushing a little bit. But most London, the main offenders are obviously London councils and Birmingham. And again, the reason I'm saying that is that it just goes to show like how kind of widespread the practices of putting people in B&Bs for longer than they should do. And sadly, unless if you're in that situation, unless you raise that with the council, it's unlikely anyone else will. So if you have got the headspace to write to the local councillors or responsible councillors for housing or whatever, then it's not going to do you any harm. So anyway, that's a sort of a bit of a tangent really. I'm going to try to see if I can sort of just put those stats, because they are quite interesting. As I say, no council should do it at all, and yet the government is recording them doing it in plain sight, which, as I say, kind of gives you an indication of where things are at in the sector. So So does anyone else want to kind of just say what should happen in circumstance or what this person could do?
Could I jump in there? This, just to clarify, this is the situation where somebody's in a travel lodge for 2 months and are 8 months pregnant, yeah?
Yep.
So the starting point, I was just checking this, it's definitely unlawful, because the Homelessness, Suitability of Accommodation England Amendment Order 2023 extends the definition of bed and breakfast to include accommodation where there's no cooking facilities. And that's designed, I think, to take into account travel lodges which don't fit the definition of bed and breakfast because they have ensuite toilets and you don't have to share a kitchen because there isn't a kitchen. So that extends that. So then you go back to the original order that said bed and breakfast is unsuitable. And then the question is, who is it unsuitable for? And my initial thought was it's people with children, but it isn't. The definition is people with family commitments. And family commitments means anyone who is pregnant or with whom a pregnant woman resides or might reasonably be expected to reside. So that means that this person in the question comes within the definition of someone with family commitments. So they should only have been put in that accommodation on an emergency basis, and only then for up to 6 weeks. So the starting point in what you do is there anything you can do about it? Have you got any basis to challenge? And the answer is yes. And then we're back to our usual problem, is that if you happen to have a solicitor handy, you can write a pre-action letter saying this person's in unsuitable accommodation and you need to rehouse them. It would also be helpful, although on a technical basis, they don't need to show any supporting evidence because they are in unsuitable accommodation. but somebody who's 8 months pregnant presumably does have access to some medical people, such as sort of doctor or midwife or health visitor or whatever, who could perhaps write a letter expressing concern, and that would seal it, I'd have thought. The argument that they've had there, which is, I think they said, sorry, we haven't got any. Yes. No, sorry, it was they don't have a guarantor. Was this the one where they'd said, sorry, we haven't got anything to meet your needs, or was another one?
I think that's the one. It's spread over several questions. I think that's the one.
Yeah, I mean,
they basically said, go and get.
Yes, sorry, we'd like to help you, but your needs are too great. I mean, that's a non-starter because they have to find somewhere. It may seem unrealistic to say it, but you could go to court, and if they said that to a judge, the judge would say, well, go and get somewhere, go and rent somewhere yourselves, or adapt somewhere. So that's I hope that's encouraging to whoever's there, that you should be able to challenge that if you can get to a court.
So the wording for that is also in the Code of Guidance in paragraph 17.33. So we'll just quote it off a very, very long and technical, kind of a statutory instrument or whatever. But so again, if I was supporting this person in casework or whatever, I'd be quoting 17.33. Just when you're making a complaint, ideally you just want to have a nice, really concise thing of just what the issue is. In this case, it'd be, I've been in B&B in the Travelodge since 1st July. Paragraph 17.33 the Code of Guidance says I should only be in for 6 weeks. I'm pregnant. That's the end of the complaint. Really, you've essentially proved it already. So that will do two things. One, it should kind of bump you up the priority list for that team to deal with you and find you something. But as I say, it would also lead to a pretty straightforward complaint to get compensation from the LGO. And I think in this situation, the council would really, if they were competent, they would realise straight away that there was no way the LGO wouldn't uphold it. So they'd offer compensation probably at stage 2, which is how a lot of councils operate. So stage 1, they'll say we didn't do anything wrong. Stage 2, they'll say, oh yeah, we actually did, and here's a few £100 based on the LGO's guidance on how much to give. So anyone else want to say anything on that one?
I think just seeing some of the comments as well, I think it would be important to highlight the fact that they're having to have extra scans. It's affecting their weight. Like there's medical evidence is showing just the drastic impact it's having, not just on her life, but her baby's life as well. And that's obviously to be considered. So within that complaint, I would probably, you don't need to make it stronger, but I don't think it would sort of harm things by including that.
I think certainly if you're going to, so the whole point of complaining is you're taking it to someone outside the housing team. If you go through the normal complaints process, it will go straight to the housing team, which is why you go to the chief exec. But a chief exec would be more likely to see that human kind of aspect, and particularly if you went to a counsellor as well, they'd be more likely to see that human aspect of, okay, we're actually, we've got a duty to promote the well-being of the child or whatever, and this is clearly not doing that. So that's kind of that's just kind of, I guess, another angle. Laura, have you got anything on this one?
Just really briefly, because I know sometimes there can be kind of difficulties when there's looking at finding what is a B&B. So if you're in like a travel lodge type premises and you've got your own bathroom and toilet and there's maybe a microwave and a fridge, I would still obviously argue that that's not really cooking facilities, but that might be something that might come up that you need to argue against. Yeah, cool.
So that's helpful. Nice one. Okay, so that was question 2, being in a B&B for 1 to 6 weeks with family commitments. Number 3, if we again go to the chat, so we've got a question there, which we're going to look at anyway because it came in during the week. But just a question around, essentially, what's the difference between a duty to refer and making a homeless application, and why does it matter? If I just paraphrase that. Does anyone else want to do this one? Because I say this loads in the training we do, so I'm bored of it. But yeah, anyone else want to say the answer?
So I don't really know the answer, so I'd have to ask you.
I'll do it if I have to. It's all right. Yeah, it's cool.
I can just do it super quick on what I think, but there's not masses to it, I don't think. So, I mean, a duty to refer is just when a sort of public authority, could be probation, hospital, prison, just kind of basically fills in a form that goes to the council, and they're saying that they're aware of somebody who's homeless or threatened with homelessness. So it doesn't constitute a homeless application. I think that's the thing that sometimes people don't realise when they might do a duty to refer. It does not constitute a homeless application. So it's just then the council might make a phone call to try and find out, and then that can kind of be about it. Whereas if say is a probation officer and they're working with someone and they actually put a homeless application instead, that will then trigger a duty for the council to actually make inquiries and do a bit more. Whereas with a duty to refer, sometimes they can get one phone call and get a little bit ignored. So I just think it's remembering that it doesn't constitute a homeless application. It is different and a lot lesser.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I think as well, there's obviously certain professions that have to do the duty to refer. If you have to do it, like Laura says, it doesn't constitute a homeless application. So just do a homeless application alongside it. And then it's triggering the sort of, temporary accommodation and everything else. And I think in the comments we've sort of seen around not having ID, like that's one thing for a whole duty to refer system, because that's not, the homeless application system is not under Part 7. You don't need ID to make a homeless application. So I think those issues that you faced through the duty to refer system actually shouldn't happen if you were to do a homeless application, which again can be really simple, just a couple of lines. This person's homeless, they would like help, they can be contacted on this number, please CC me into any whatever, because I've got evidence of their hospital stay or whatever it might be. And I think you'll find you'll get a much better answer that way.
There's also this kind of issue where non-public authorities will be told, like so if you're a street outreach worker, for example, you'll be told to use the duty to refer form, which most duty to refer forms, if you read the small print, it does actually say this isn't a homeless application. I think it's paragraph 18.9 or something in the code of guidance specifically says, as Laura just said, it's this duty to refer doesn't trigger a homeless application because it's given the council reason to believe that the person might be homeless, but it's not actually asked the council for help from that person. That's the two things you need to do to actually hit section 184 in terms of making a homeless application. So so if you're a professional outside prisons and hospitals and whatever, and you're told to fill in a duty to refer form, you need to be really kind of careful how you do that, because you might be kind of stitching your client up without realizing it. One of the problems with duty to refer forms is it doesn't usually actually ask for enough information for the council to work out if you're actually in priority need or not. So you already want to be providing more information than they're asking for, so that you can show that there is reason to believe that person might be vulnerable or whatever it is. And I'm not advising this necessarily, but certainly in my kind of casework, certainly when I worked at Just Us, if they told me to fill in the duty to refer form, I just blankly refused and just sent an email saying this is a homeless application, and then just kind of satisfied those points. And as Shannon says, if you're a probation officer, yes, you have a duty to refer, so do it, but then follow it up with another email saying this is a homeless application, Joe Bloggs wants your help to get housed, and this is a situation. So that's I've just noticed there's some more kind of stuff coming in on the live chat about that. So I think that should hopefully give us a foundation to go into more complicated situations. But I think that's the essence of it, really. Duty to refer, in my experience, is pretty toothless. But then there's just some stuff coming in. Has anyone else got a chance to read that? Because I've lost track of it a little bit. There's quite a lot to it now. Has anyone else been tracking that one?
I did look at the new one that's come in.
What's the situation that's been asked about?
Well, in a nutshell, it's somebody who got turned away and they suffered serious injuries as a result of being made street homeless. I mean, very, very serious injuries. It says they got frostbite, sepsis, and had to have bilateral amputation. So I think the question there is what can you do about it? And that raises the interesting question legally of to what extent can you get compensation as a result of a failure of a local authority to behave appropriately on a homeless application. And that's distinct from compensation awarded by an ombudsman. And the general position is there's always been that you can't claim compensation for this sort of thing because it's what's known as a public law duty rather than a private law duty. And the crazy thing with that is that, or what that means is that if the duty is owed to the world in general, then there's no personal duty. You can only sue somebody if they have a duty personally to you. That I won't go into that in more detail, but it's either a contractual duty or a duty of care or something. Now you may say, well, surely they've got a duty of care to people, but the policy as well is against that, because if the government felt that local authorities were going to be subject to compensation claims, they'd be worried about floodgates opening up and everybody getting sued. There is a way round that, which has sort of been creeping in over the years, which is Article 3 of the Human Rights Convention, which is the freedom or the right not to be subjected to cruel and degrading treatment. And there is a right to compensation where somebody treats you so badly that it amounts to cruel and degrading treatment. So if you were treated in this way and you suffered what this person suffered, it's arguable that you could bring a claim for compensation for breach of your human rights. It's fairly new territory, and I know a solicitor who I won't name but has been pursuing this, and the strange thing is that a lot of public bodies will settle often quite large sums of money when faced with what sounds like a serious claim on this basis. But they have, as far as I'm aware, not many of them have been to court. But if anybody hears of one, please let me know, because I'd like to see more. So that's quite a long answer to that. But the problem is the starting point would be that and if you ask most lawyers, can I make a compensation claim? They'd probably say no, because there's no cause of action against a public body.
I think so. Will, how would someone search out a solicitor who can take on that sort of case? Would it just be a case of Googling human rights lawyers or something? Would that be specific enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to find. I would say, if you were to type human rights law, I don't know what you'd get, because it's such a broad term. I mean, you might put human rights compensation claim. I mean, maybe there are more people out there. I'll just Google it myself now.
I mean, whilst you're doing that, also just to follow on what you said there about the LGO. The LGO, like, I think the max. I mean, they kind of say. I mean, this would be kind of the very upper limit of what they can recommend, but you're still only looking at a couple of thousand, which is crazy for the level of injury this person's had. This next bit it also applies a little bit to the first question we answered about domestic abuse, because again, I can only say what I would do, so don't quote me on this, but if it was me in a situation where you are working with someone who is at risk of domestic abuse and they've been failed by a council, or in this case where you've got someone who's now got care and support needs and has suffered injury following something like that, I would be considering raising a safeguarding alert against the housing officer who failed them. Now that sounds like an extreme way of doing stuff, but I would say it's proportionate in this case. And also what that might also do is open up the possibility of the adult safeguarding board getting involved. Again, I've not really seen it. They talk a lot. I've not really seen it the nitty gritty of it really working, but that would not do you any harm, at least to have a conversation with the local safeguarding adult board manager, because this is clearly, I've never got a clear answer of whether this would constitute institutional abuse. I've asked the question to lots of social workers. The question seems to be, I think it is that it would be, but they've never actually said it because they don't know for sure. Again, it kind of comes back to what we were saying about, there's no duty of care in these settings, so it's not the same as if you were a resident of a care home and this kind of injury was incurred. But I think it's certainly something that you want to make as much noise as you possibly can do without disclosing personal information about the individual, and only kind of doing what they're happy with. But it just seems to be something which is a never event, which it wouldn't harm to have as many competent professions involved to kind of look into it, really.
To go back to your question, Mike, I think if you did Google human rights compensation lawyer or solicitor, you're more like, the word solicitor is more likely to get you somebody this side of the Atlantic. So that might find you somewhere. And there's a little bit, I was just looking without, I mean, stop me if you don't want to talk about this subject any longer, but if I give you an example, the main case that deals with this was back in 1995, and it's called X v Bedfordshire County Council. And you may have heard of this case because they placed a family who had, I think they had special needs and they were quite vulnerable, and they placed them in a particularly unpleasant piece of accommodation where they were victimized by local criminals, which included being tortured, and they went through hell. And in initial point, the initial claim led to them being compensated, but it then went either to the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, who said, no, there isn't a cause of action. But then I was just looking, and there's a case called ZV UK from 2018, where it was held, and this is where you can see it. A very common problem with public law is where children are taken into care. And I think anybody familiar with the system knows that the chances of them getting put somewhere where they're going to be possibly even worse off than they were before they were taken into care is quite high. So the chances of children being placed with abusive carers has led to claims against local authorities, which have led to compensation. So I think that the tide is moving that way. So people should pursue it. I mean, it's not something I personally could do because I don't deal with compensation claims, but have a Google search, and good luck to anybody who wants to bring a claim like that.
I mean, oh, go on, Shannon.
I was just going to add in, because I think as well, what's so angering about all of this is the council hasn't broken the law, because they've got the duty to refer and then they don't have to legally do anything with that. So it's not like, so even when you say you've got a client who's applied under Part 6, you know, it's in the code of guidance that the housing authority should take extra note to try and recognise homelessness cases under Part 6 as Part 7. Like, that's something you could almost beat them with, you know, like with duty to refer. It just feels like there's an open loophole for councils to not do it and to not be held account, unless obviously you go down sort of the human rights sort of avenue. But you kind of, well, I'm sat here feeling like, no, that housing department, that housing officer, that there needs to be some sort of accountability for the sort of the drastic harm that people are coming, like, are receiving. And this isn't, I know it's like a once in a million case, but it's not. Or at the moment, maybe I'm being a bit pessimistic, and sorry guys, but at the moment it doesn't feel like this is a once in a million case. It feels like these sort of decisions, this sort of harmful impact on the people who, you know, at the bottom of the pile, so to speak, I don't think that, but that's how they're treated, I think are just happening more and more often, and there's less and less accountability. And I'm sorry for my little downer rant there, but
No.
frustrating.
No, I think so. This might come across as callous, but if, you know, so in Bedford, you know, for years, you know, but maybe 3 or 4 years, we've been getting uphill complaints. We've been saying to the councillors, you know, something bad's going to happen here. And then 2019, something really bad happened, and they were caught, you know, absolutely red-handed. And that, you know, one sense, it didn't help the person at the time, but that led to some very significant changes within the culture of the council. So again, if you're a professional supporting people regularly, you know, regularly seeing these issues, as Shannon says, you know, they're not uncommon. But then you have an issue like this come along where actually, you know, someone suffers, you know, kind of, you know, really kind of exceptional harm, and everyone can see it. Then you can potentially use that to get, you know, kind of really significant improvements. I appreciate it doesn't help the person in the situation. You know, preparing for that, you'd want to be doing some just really diligent casework, subject to access requests. You know, Shannon kind of says, well, potentially the council's not failed here. If the duty to refer was anything that went in, and the council tried to call the person and didn't get through, and, you know, kind of fizzled out, then it's going to be a lot more difficult. But if you can find someone where actually, you know, there was a duty triggered at some point because actually maybe the person approached on their own or something, rang them up or whatever, then you're going to be in a much stronger position. But when you're kind of doing, I mean, I've got a couple of LGO complaints in at the moment, and I'm just seeing like how the odds are stacked against you. You know, you need to have all your ducks in a row from the start to really kind of get a really good outcome, or really fair outcome. Because generally speaking, if there are any gaps in the records or anything like that, anything that you can't prove, the LGO seems to kind of tend to find with, you know, on the side of the council. So, but yeah, I think it's in a kind of a dark sort of way, it's an opportunity to potentially see wider improvements. So as I say, it's not going to help this person, I guess.
Just one last thing to add on that, because yeah, if you're now wanting to do something about this case or what have you, I've done a few FOIs now around, so freedom of information requests around the duty to refers, and then so you can ask, right, how many duty to refers were made, and then out of those, how many Part 7 homelessness applications were accepted. And then you can also ask like various questions like how many were going through domestic abuse, and you'll soon start to see that the numbers don't legally or shouldn't, you know, sort of add up. Now it depends on your area, it depends like what you're wanting to do with it, but I'd like to think that, you know, local newspapers, local MPs, it could, if you got the right information in the right way and stuff, and I'd sort of recommend sitting with it for a while, digesting it, look at the live tables, because they have to sort of submit duty to refers on there. You can also even ask which organisations are doing the duty to refers. So if you've got a supported accommodation that is doing lots of duty to refers when they legally don't have to, you can find that out, and then actually you can almost contact them and say, look guys, like, you don't need to be doing this, do this instead. And then it's sort of, the hope is to have like a sort of cultural change, I guess, and to improve like one bit at a time. But I'm really for sort of freedom of information requests at the minute. I think they're quite a useful tool.
Yeah, so you're gonna. I know you've been doing, well, you say you've done a few FOI, Shannon. You've done I don't know, we're in 3 figures yet, but yeah. I'm just thinking, yeah, kind of thinking there. So just going on the information in the question, you know, the duty to refer was done by the hospital discharge team. Now potentially, you know, I'm speculating obviously here, so I'm sorry if I'm being really unfair here, but as soon as you have a case like this, then yeah, everyone, you know, all the professions potentially are going to be like, you know, they're going to be held to account. And the NHS, you know, in one sense, the discharge team, they might be in a situation where actually they didn't do what they should do. I've seen situations like this before where, you know, the referring agency just didn't do their job properly, you know, either didn't do a duty to refer at all or didn't include the right information. And in one sense, you know, you might have a situation here, you know, because it's such a serious event where actually multiple organisations, you know, are become under quite a lot of scrutiny, and that can also mean that there's lots of organisations who will try to downplay it. I mean, there's obviously been a lot with Lucy Letby and stuff recently in the news about how, you know, managers are kind of like, you know, kind of deleted their wrongdoings in various reports and stuff like that to kind of avoid that scrutiny. But that's the system that we're working in, and as I say, that's why if you're gonna get those important outcomes and those big cases that kind of show where something's going wrong, you have to be really diligent and effectively really boring. You know, you have to go for the subject access request, which could be 1,000 pages long, and you know, document where those failings are, and so it's not an easy task, but it certainly can be done. So yeah, I mean, so that was we'll call that question 4 about well, question 3 and 4 about the duty to refer, but also about, you know, whether you can get compensation for injury incurred after a council failure. The answer is no by the sound of it, unfortunately. But yeah, hopefully there's some stuff in there which was useful anyway. Laura, have you got anything on this one, or
I can't see the actual comment, but from what you guys have said, the understanding I've got is, so a duty to refer went into the council from the hospital, nothing was really done, and then the person suffered serious injury as a result for being street homeless.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is when a lot of systems are failing, aren't they? You know, people shouldn't be discharged to the streets, they shouldn't just be put in taxis and put to the council. The duty to refer it doesn't work in that sense. You know, there should be more preparations put in place, you know, phone call to the council to make sure that homeless application is taken, to make sure that they're aware. Then that triggers, you know, that section 188 emergency accommodation, which is, you know, I can't stress this enough, because it is reason to believe homeless, reason to believe eligible, reason to believe maybe priority need. And it's such a low threshold because it's supposed to be that safety net. So if, you know, if the things would have followed in process how they're supposed to work, then that safety net would have, you know, hopefully that person would have then been put in emergency accommodation and wouldn't have suffered, you know, the injuries that they did. And it also makes me wonder who else was aware of this, because it must have been a bit of a prolonged period. I assume it can't have just been a couple of nights. So was there any outreach workers that were aware of this person? Are they pushing on the council enough? Or, you know, you kind of, I'd be really wanting to look into a lot of different elements of this case, to be honest, and because there's, you know, there's some huge failings there. And if the person was agreeable, it would be one of those cases, as horrendous as it is, that you'd want to kind of use to highlight, look, this is what can happen when you know, systems aren't followed correctly or in the way they should be.
I mean, another thing is just on that as well, I think, so you can use FOS for NHS as far as I know. I've never done it, I don't think, but so you might also be asking questions to the hospital discharge team. What the training do they get on housing law? I'm not going to name. I've worked with the hospital discharge team before, and they basically say, "Well, we don't bother doing duty refers because they never work." And I was like, "The reason they don't work is because you're not triggering a homes application, but you've still got a duty to do it, so you should still be doing it." So it's like social services. Social services in the NHS missed this ridiculously easy opportunity to stop bed blocking and get their clients adequate housing, so their care and support needs to be taken care of. If only they bothered to just get some cursory understanding of homelessness law, because we said it before, families who are told they're intentionally homeless are then sent to children's services, who then have to house them when they're not intentionally homeless in the first place. And the same in hospital. You've got people who are obviously going to be, there's obviously going to be reason to believe they might be in priority need if they're coming out of hospital. It's an incredibly rare situation where that wouldn't be the case. And so, and yet hospitals are like, well, we've had this person for 28 days extra because we've got nowhere to put them. And it's like, that's cost the state, whatever it is, 20K or whatever, because of the bed cost. Why is the hospital not kind of chasing the council more effectively to get them to be housing people more quickly?
Well, you feel like as well that they will know kind of, okay, we're going to be discharging them in a week, 2 weeks, or whatever. So if you do the homeless application, then that should really trigger the prevention duty. The council should then be looking into to take steps. Right, we know this person is being discharged at this time. We need this emergency accommodation ready. It shouldn't be this difficult, really, in my eyes. But
yeah, and I just want to, so I've been on one recently. I told these guys earlier, just before we went live, whatever, that Facebook keeps throwing these Facebook posts at me, which just are going to annoy me. So from these different sort of professions, and there's a group with it's basically run by housing officers, and there's just this kind of real apathy and real lack of understanding that things could be better, because everyone sort of shrugs and says, oh, it's just there's no housing, that's the way it is. But that if you look at local authorities, and again looking at these live tables, these live stats from the government website, those London councils, you can see they are, absolutely at capacity, because they're having to put families in TA for more than in B&Bs for more than 6 weeks. But most local authorities are not anywhere near that stage yet. So most local authorities out there, if you're outside London, if you're outside Birmingham, actually there is a huge amount they could be doing, if only we effectively challenge them. So sorry, I'll probably be banging that drum for a while now, because it's just what I'm spending time thinking about, basically. But yeah, okay. So do we feel? Yeah, I think we've kind of covered quite a lot of ground there, and probably given quite a lot of things that could be done in this situation. Obviously, we don't know the full details, but I'm hoping that person is now housed. It'd be incredible if they weren't now. But again, seeing stranger things happen. So yeah, moving on to what was going to be question 5. I don't know if there's a question in there. Just have we missed any questions? I think there's a few comments, but they're not necessarily questions in there. If not, we will go to our little stuff that was coming in through the week. And this is actually the next one we're going to look at is an article which was in the Manchester Evening News or something. I'm going to stick the link into the live chat if it fits. It's like a really long link. But basically, the headline was, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, the headline was, yeah, mother of 7 in 1-bed temporary accommodation since December or November or something, and the council, just kind of said there's nothing we can do. Kind of what they said. Actually, at the end of it, they said, yeah, actually, we will try and sort it out. Again, this is the Facebook post that really, kind of the algorithm knows it will annoy me, because this was put into a group. Essentially the reason that it was put in the group was to say that, if you're trying to get housed, if you're trying to chase the council because you're overcrowded, look how bad this family situation is, and nothing's been done about them, that kind of thing. And then there was a whole range of just really kind of negative, judgmental comments about the mum. And I guess before I even want to start looking at it, so yeah, as I say, this family is the family of 8 in TA, in a 1-bed TA, but just a few kind of basic bits. There isn't enough information in the article to work out what exactly has happened here, but there's no reason to think that the mum's at fault here. And secondly, I'm not an economist, but our economy is based on the fact that we have a growing population and it needs to be young. So when we have a situation like this where we've got 7 kids living in TA, any sensible person would want to maximise the kind of the living standards of those kids, because we know if we don't, they're more likely to certainly not thrive later in life, and more likely to show up in other, other kind of sort of sectors and stuff like that down the line. So, but yeah, that's just me on a bit of a soapbox or whatever. But legally speaking, is it, what is the situation? What, how ridiculous does a family situation need to be before a council, has to find them alternative accommodation? Because what the council's saying is, well, there's no 5-bed property, so you're stuck in this 1-bed property until we find one. But clearly there would be less unsuitable properties available. So yeah, as I say, unfortunately there's no kind of formula which says at what point the council has to do stuff. But it seems to me incredible that the council could be said to be promoting the well-being of these children in this situation, which they have, a duty under the Children Act to promote the well-being of the children. So it seems to me even on that basis they are failing in that. But yeah, I mean, Will, I know this is something you deal with a lot. I don't know, do you want to start off by kind of giving us an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of sound like Mr. Know-all or the person who can solve things that other people can't, because presumably other people have looked at this situation and not been able to help this lady and her family. But if it was me, I would definitely obviously be pursuing some sort of, challenge. But going to the end here, the council, I assume that the local authority is Oldham Council, and they say they're aware of it and they're working to try and find a temporary housing solution. So the question would be whether you could challenge them for not doing enough to discharge their duty. And as you say, it seems, I would have thought, I don't know what anyone else thinks, but if somebody needs a 5-bedroom property, that wouldn't necessarily be a reason to keep them in a 1-bedroom property if a 4-bedroom property was available. So you might be able to say that they should be given something that's less unsuitable, even though it's not ideal. One thing that I'm just trying to figure out, this must be a case where they are, I haven't done the maths, but in order to determine statutory overcrowding, you have to work out the number of rooms and the ages of the family. I don't know if anybody else has done that, but presumably if it's a 1-bedroom flat, then this many people would make it statutorily overcrowded. The problem is that even if you are statutorily overcrowded, that doesn't mean that there's a mandatory duty on the council to do anything. One thing that was quite interesting, I was watching a video which is on YouTube. I can put a link to it. I was really pleased because I found it. I thought I'd lost it, but it's from last September, and it's a video by Zia Nabi, who's a barrister at Doughty Street Chambers and a specialist in this area. And he put together a webinar just updating people on recent developments in the law on suitability. And one of the points that came up in the conversation was overcrowding, because these councils are very quick to say, oh, no, there's no statutory overcrowding. And then even if there is, they'll say, well, that's not the be all and end all. But what Zia was saying was that the sort of, let me think, it's difficult. The suitability regulations, I think 2010 or 2012, mean that in determining suitability, councils have to have regard to hazards in the 2004 Housing Act, I think it is. And one of those hazards is overcrowding. And the test for determining overcrowding is much better than the test in statutory overcrowding. So if you run that together with the duty towards children under Section 11 to maintain the best interest of children under Section 11 of the Children Act 2004 as well, you've then got a powerful combination of things you can argue about. Whether or not all these things would get you somewhere remains to be seen. But the question here would be that they're definitely homeless at home. They've got a home, but they're homeless. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unsuitable, I think, in anyone's books. So the question then is, have the council done enough to discharge their duty? And there have been cases recently. The most notable one was the, it's called Elkundi, ELKUNDI, where the Court of Appeal, I think it was asked to decide, well, what do you do if a council saying, yeah, we know you're homeless, but sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. Is that lawful? And then also, if it is unlawful, what can the court do about it? Because they're conscious of the fact that the court may seem unrealistic, just saying you have got to house this family and you've got 14 days to do it, and we don't care. We don't want to hear any excuses about shortages. And the answer is, yeah, they can actually, if you get to that stage, the court will order them to provide accommodation, and they won't listen to a lot of excuses about shortages and so forth, because at the end of the day, it's a mandatory duty. It doesn't say if you can find something, give it to them. It says you have to provide suitable accommodation for people who are homeless. And so they should push on with it. I'm sorry that it's got to the stage, because I'm sure she must have been through lawyers and people to try to help her. So, and I don't want to.
I don't know. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's potentially not the case. I think a lot of people, they're just not able to access a lawyer. And so one sense, this, I don't know, but this maybe this mother kind of said, actually, I'm so desperate, I'm going to go to the press. Who knows? As a way to kind of get a better outcome. But I wouldn't assume that they've seen a solicitor yet or an advice service.
Well, I hope they can find one. I don't know.
I don't know what I think might have happened.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I've not read it right. What I think might have happened with this case, because otherwise it's I think that maybe she hasn't actually made a homeless application, is not aware she can make a homeless application. So I think it's actually at the moment all under Part 6 in the allocations. So they've probably increased her banding, because I think she was already in the property and it was suitable maybe in the beginning because it was just her and her 2-year-old. So she had the one bed. Then she's then got her other children have come with her. So then she's then gone to the housing register, probably increased her banding. But then she probably finds that she can't bid on anything in her area, or is having trouble bidding. But I don't think she's actually made a homeless application. Maybe no one's advised her that. She's not aware. So she's not under Part 7. Because I think if she was under Part 7, well, you would hope, because her place is obviously unreasonable to occupy, so she legally is homeless. She would hope they should be then, keeping things under review. They should be offering her things, but the risk there is that they could offer her something out of placement as temporary accommodation. But then, you could then look to challenge that. But I just have a feeling with this case that maybe she's not actually made a homeless application, because otherwise it's quite shocking, isn't it? Really, to be in a one.
So sometimes you just got to kind of decipher, because obviously it's going through a journalist who doesn't know what housing law is either, so they kind of potentially been a little bit clumsy with the terminology. The way I read it was that she'd been placed in temporary accommodation with just her and her daughter, or and her son, the baby, and then the other children had kind of returned to her care. And so the way I read it was that they were in accommodation under temporary accommodation of some sort. And then and they've been in there way longer than they should have. That's how I might have just jumped to a conclusion then. But, I mean, it's a really good point to kind of emphasise. Again, I think it's 18.9 or 10 or something in the Code of Guidance. It makes the point that local authorities should be really, really careful that when they're getting a Part 6 application, that they are, they're making sure there's no, that if there's reasons to believe that family or that person might be homeless, then they should immediately be treating it as a Part 7 application.
It may be even worse.
Unfortunately, sometimes the two departments don't actually speak to each other. So sometimes you make the Part 7 application, it doesn't actually impact on your housing register like it should do. People stay in standard, even though they've made a homeless application, should now be boosted up. But yeah.
Looking at this, it looks as if I just looked at the landlord or the organisation First Choice Homes Oldham, which is quoted. I looked at their website, and they are a housing association. I thought maybe they were a sort of arm's length organisation that manages the council housing stock, but it might be even worse that she's just made an application for a transfer to a housing association which only has limited housing stock, and so. But it's worrying that the council. It was somebody from Oldham City Council that said we're aware of this. Because I'd have thought if they're aware of it, they've got two things they should be thinking of. One is, why aren't these people are homeless? We should be processing a homelessness application. And the other is, these children are in need. We should. I'm assuming
it's a unitary authority. I checked.
Yeah. Okay. So they've got both of those duties. So you're sort of in a situation which you get a lot in this. It comes back in a way to what we were talking about before with hospitals and things, but. They don't want to rock the boat, so they'll sort of say, "Well, let's keep quiet. You know, I better not make a fuss about this because I'll have the manager of the local homeless persons unit on the phone tomorrow if I refer them, saying, what are you doing? Don't you know how busy we are?" So you get that sort of situation where everybody's sort of turning a blind eye.
Yeah. I mean, and that's that. Yeah, I've seen that many times where you do get flack. You get a call from. Yeah, your boss will get a call from their boss to say, you know, what are you doing? Why are you sending people to us? And
well, what's quite common, the common thread, and I was going to, if you give me 1 minute, I'll just have my little rant on this. It's a sort of problem of bureaucracy in the modern age, and the sort of enemy in the machine, as it were, is the what I'd call the middle management person. Because you've got the frontline staff who are often quite well motivated and helpful until they get burnt out, and they think, yeah, I want to help this person, so they then set things in motion, and then they get a visit from their manager who says, what are you up to? You shouldn't be doing that. Same thing with the hospital staff. The people, you get these poor people in the hospital whose duty it is to sort of try and get people discharged, but they've got no power, they've got no teeth. So the local authority just ignore them. And then a manager comes and says, why is this person still on the ward? Stop making a fuss, just discharge them. And you got it with that. I mean, I don't want to trivialize it, but the same bureaucratic phenomena was happening in the Lucy Letby case, where the people were complaining and it was like, stop making a fuss, because you don't, and that's what happens with these homeless cases. But I hope this lady makes a homeless application and that she gets somewhere with it. But it's a sad state of affairs, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it seems like, you know, that is just becoming almost like, you know, the kind of the biggest issue that people face is, you know, it's not, as you said before, Will, but it's no longer a case of, you know, priority need decisions. It's about, you know, the suitability of temporary accommodation and how these, you know, how that bottleneck of waiting to actually get housed is dealt with. And I guess, you know, if you're a professional, you know, it's on us to try and work out, okay, you know, housing stock and house building is not an act of God. Some people are somewhere making decisions about this. So how do we organise and how do we get together locally with people to actually, you know, to find out what the issues are and to push for improvements? And again, you know, an absolute no-brainer is to be raising these issues with local councillors, because they've got lots of plates to spin. They won't necessarily know the first thing about homelessness or housing stuff, but if you raise it with them, they'll quickly learn about it, particularly if you're throwing, you know, kind of, you know, robust cases at them. And they'll be then thinking about it when it comes to their full council and their budget meetings and stuff. They think, okay, yeah, we need to allot more money to this problem. We're not getting more questions on the live chat. Have you guys got time to look at the verification stuff, the verification of rough sleepers and homeless applications? Have you got another like 10 minutes? Is that right?
Yeah. Can I just say just one thing really quickly, just on that last one, just because it comes up a lot, just to say that when councils say, oh, we just don't have accommodation, shortage of accommodation, that's not actually a sufficient enough reason to not comply with the duty. So she has made a homeless application, they have got a duty to provide suitable temp accommodation. That might be a free bed, but they can't say, well, we just haven't got the accommodation, can't do it. That's, they've got a duty.
And I would say that's the point at which housing officers are into, in my opinion, unethical conduct, because as soon as you kind of just shrug and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, I've got, there's a problem and I've got nothing to offer, I would say that's an issue that then perpetuates the problem itself. I'd say to any professional, if you're seeing these problems, you have a role in the solution. And you might not be the answer to it fully, but there must be, you have to do something. You can't just swallow it and just kind of get kind of take the bullying you get from your boss or whatever, and kind of just capitulate. Again, the reason I'm saying that is because obviously we're preparing for the ethics of gatekeeping event in a couple of months, and I'm just trying to just thinking through a few things there. So yeah, all gone, Shannon.
Yeah, because I think I've obviously got my big picture hat on tonight or what have you. But it's also annoying that they've talked about mold. They've talked about the weeb Ishak, who died this year because of the mold, and they talk about her kids having coughs. And what point does the journalist, and not the specific one who's written this article, but journalists in general, at what point do they not see all of these various issues and cases coming to the forefront? And I think the homelessness sector, housing law, now granted not to Will's level, but to my level anyway, is fairly accessible. It's fairly easy to read. I'm not academic and I can understand some of it. So if you're a journalist, who I would argue is academic, do you not have a responsibility to actually provide the general public with the seriousness and the fact that this is not lawful, this is unlawful, this isn't like going above and beyond for a family of 8, this is giving them their legal, just frustrating on that point, where you're saying, everyone who's involved, we talk about multi-agency working, and, I think where there's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of responsibility. So then, because there's no accountability, it's no one's problem, it's no one's thing to solve, and it's just, yeah.
Definitely. I'd say with the social worker as well, they can't, or we don't do housing, but they will have easy access to professional housing advice if they're not sure. So they could get that housing advice quite easily, and then look to push this case further for this lady.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I'm not going to start ranting about social workers, I promise, but they are in a very, very vulnerable position, and they soon learn that they go into a situation where the person's problems are often social and material, and it's not just about parenting skills, but then they try to get involved and deal with the sort of things you were saying, Shannon, and then they get the visit, or they get the memo or the email. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the cases I was doing involving people with no recourse to public funds who were obliged to apply to children's services departments for accommodation on the basis that they were destitute, you'd have to do the work in order to believe just how low people could sink in terms of the professionals that were dealing with those people, because they would do anything they could to try to refuse these people accommodation, even saying, the child, they're not destitute, they've got a packet of rice in the cupboard, it's just ridiculous, and treating people, treating people really, really badly, shouting at people in front of their children, and it's incredible. But the pressure that they must have been under, I can only assume that nobody goes into that sort of work and says, I'd like to be a social worker so that I can mistreat migrant families. But they end up doing that, and that shows what enormous pressure they were under. And apologies to all the social workers out there who do that work conscientiously, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think the good ones know that the bad ones are fairly common. So it's not like I would be suspicious of anyone who said, "Oh, there's no problems." Why are you criticising the profession when when clearly I think everyone knows there are issues.
It's a political problem, really, or just an existential problem, that if you create a bureaucracy, it will gravitate towards the opposite from what you wanted it to do, because unless you give it unlimited resources, but if you do that, somebody will probably be putting it in their Swiss bank account. So you've got to just look, I mean, it's like and sorry to go on about Lucy Letby thing again, but the lessons of these things is you just have to live life expecting the very worst possible thing that can happen, and plan for it. And with all of these bureaucracies, you have to say, you know, with the, has anyone dealt with the early help scheme for children's services? If anyone's dealt with them, you know, I mean, you'd know that that's a complete waste of time. But that was set up as a response to the Baby P inquiry, where they said people need early intervention from social workers. So what do? They set up a bunch of people who have no training and no skills, called early help, and they gatekeep, so they can't get to social workers. So sorry, I said I wasn't going to rant.
No, the thing is not, you know, it's surprising how like silent the homelessness sector is about this stuff. You know, kind of so I think it's good to say it. You know, I'm hoping it's, you know, someone out there is kind of, I don't know, not encouraged by it, but I guess reassured that they're probably not the only ones who are seeing this kind of stuff. So yeah, and just a comment there, just the particular council, I won't name them, but they're just saying, you know, that's what they say when we've got nothing available. And you know, I go on about Bedford a lot because that's where, you know, that's where I've worked. But Bedford, you know, Shannon might correct me on this. I think they've just employed, or they've just found the funding for 20 additional housing officers in the council, or housing related officers, and they've invested, you know, millions and millions of pounds in decent quality TA. So it can be done. You know, so any council who says, "Oh, there's nothing we can do," you just need to push harder, basically, because there is some stuff they can do. But yeah, as I say, well, yeah, rather than kind of go on all day about this stuff, if we could just finish by just talking about this verification of rough sleepers and homeless applications effectively, because we've said for a long time we don't like the verification of rough sleeping process for various reasons, but one of them is it's just not lawful, because if a person approaches a local authority and says, "I'm homeless, can you help me out?" and there's reasons to believe they might be in priority needs, then the council should be putting them in temporary accommodation, not telling them to go and rough sleep. So the rough sleeper team can come and find them. But Shannon, do you want to just talk about, because you've been doing some great work with, well, all over the place really, but yeah, do you want to just talk about this latest report that's come out?
Yeah, so basically took part in this focus group. There was 23 of us. So there was 3 people with lived experience. That was sort of the role that I was there for that day. 16 working in the voluntary sector and 4 for local authorities. But they basically wanted to find out what verification was happening across the country and what did people think of it. And it was like, it was really interesting, because overall 52% of the people in the room said that it was positive and 48% said it was negative. And I think the people with lived experience, I think most of us, from what I can remember, we were all quite against verification because it's inhumane. There's no legal basis, was often where I was coming from. And you're starting off that relationship by basically saying, "I don't trust you, I'm going to verify you." And it was also, there was a lot of talk around sort of how the verification model, sort of, you know, when you're going out to verify someone, if they're sat up on a bench, well, you can't verify them because they're not rough sleeping. If they're in their car, and this was sort of picked up on in sort of like, I think in the report they called it a 2-tier, sort of between verified and non-verified. Whereas I was like, you guys are talking about a 2-tier between people who are rough sleeping and people who are rough sleeping. Like, we're almost breaking people down, like, "Oh, you're sleeping in the car, so it's not that bad." Like, at what point do we, again, this is like sort of my negative head on perhaps, but it's almost like, well, you're not in a coffin, so you're all right. And that's happening. That's the reality of it. People are dying. And it also sort of was a sound in that I think so many people in the room, obviously the majority being professionals in the sector, didn't know about homeless applications. They didn't know about the law. They And they were so frustrated. Like, I really got the vibe that most people there were just like, we're going out, we're verifying, and then the council does nothing. And we're trying to do this, or we can't verify because of this. And we're told that verification has to work in this way. And obviously verification, like legally, policy wise, it doesn't exist. And so I think it was surprising for me that a lot of people were frustrated with it, then frustrating that they hadn't gone and sort of, I guess, worked out what more they could do. And I know there's like difficulty in the funding elements, and people that are verifying are sort of being funded by the local authority, but it was a really interesting report. There was a lot of sort of themes that came out about sort of humanity and multi-agency working, of course. I was really pleased to say that they included the fact that verification is used as gatekeeping, because that was sort of the drum that I was banging, and how that the workers actually need to know the law. And we did discuss duty to refer briefly, and I, in my little group or whatever, was sort of like, no, it's not, as we've discussed earlier. I guess, how do you guys sort of view verification? Or
Can I just ask, Shannon, so for the 52% who thought it was positive, did they say why they thought it was positive? Was it just about managing numbers, or what was their thinking behind that?
So I think a lot of people thought it was positive because it enabled the service to then tailor where they needed to focus support. So if they knew that they had lots of rough sleepers instead of sofa surfers, they could focus their outreach on that rather than in reach that month or whatever it might be. I think a lot of people found it not helpful in terms of their work, but it meant that it opened up other doors. So if you were verified by the outreach team or the whatever service, you were then eligible to get a food bank voucher. You were then eligible to access the day centre. You were then eligible to use the showers, so it was a gatekeeping as well in terms of, so yeah, exactly. A lot of the homelessness like services were saying, oh no, they can't use our services because we don't know that they're homeless.
But it's almost like they were kind of trapped in this mentality of like, so that, unless this person is verified, we can't do all this good stuff for them. They couldn't think that.
Yeah, I experienced that. So when I was rough sleeping in whatever area, I don't want to name people, but a service literally said to myself, well, we can't help you until you're verified. We'll come out early hours of the morning and verify you. So I'm thinking, right, 3, 4 a.m, early hours to verified, I'm rough sleeping. Rock up at 7 a.m. after the most horrendous storm, and obviously you have to stay in the same place. You can't go and find additional shelter because you have to be verified in order to get help from this service, who again wasn't even the council. They weren't going to make a homeless application. They were going to make it so I could get more food and better showers, and it's madness.
Sorry, essentially the way the question was framed, it wasn't saying, do you think verification is a good idea in itself? You're saying, verification with all these bonuses, because Shannon, we've done training in areas where actually, if you are verified, you do get a good service, that's for sure. But essentially, it seems that the workers are trapped in this notion that unless you are verified, you can't get all that stuff. And actually, they're the ones who are holding that, controlling who gets that anyway. So it just seems like a bit of a not a very good research technique to ask that question in that way, if people are just limited by what they think how it should work.
I think it's a really difficult topic to research because you've got mixed professions in the room that are going to have potentially different views and conflicting views. Like you say, there's, in an ideal world, we believe in verification, and then there's verification in practice. And I think in the report they sort of say, like, these were the statistics from the poll we did. However, a lot of people would say actually that it's a mixture of yes and no's, because sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't work. Like all of these systems, like duty to refer, I know authorities that it works really, really well, as it should do. But I think this is the problem when we're inserting additional barriers that we think are going to be helpful rather than sort of going back to basics. You know, let's add in verification, let's add in a step to try and help people. But it looks so different in every area that it's actually often more harmful.
I was just trying to find the link, Shannon. Have you got the link just to put it in the live chat, and I'll put it in just so people know what we're talking about. So it was Homeless Link who did it, right? But as you say, it was kind of a mix of professions and sectors and stuff like that. So yeah.
I did have a quick look at the report, and I think some of the people who said yes, I think they said they would have said yes and no if they could have said yes and no. So they saw some good points of it, but some of the bits in the report were, quite shocking when it came to the verification process, where it's saying if they weren't bedded down, like if they were sat up eating a sandwich or something, then they weren't seen as homeless. So it was just, or I think there was another bit about somebody because they were sat up in a wheelchair, they weren't then verified as homeless because they weren't bedded down. I mean, it's a bit, I think the whole verification process really annoys me, because I think it really muddles the waters with the council duties, because there's nothing in the legislation or in the guidance about having to be verified, and it's reason to believe legally homeless, not rough sleeping, and reason to believe eligible, and reason to believe may need to get emergency accommodation. I think, and then I've spoken to a housing officer before where they've said to me, well, they haven't been verified 3 times, so we don't have reason to believe they're homeless. So you do have reason to believe they're homeless because they're telling you they are homeless. It's all about this kind of distrust. It's like, oh, well, we've got to verify them because what if they're lying? Then, God, we don't want to give them this tiny bit of service and the food bank voucher because they might be lying. It's just, it really annoys me. And I think also it's used as a bit of a tool by the council as gatekeeping. And I think people are then sometimes pushed into making a hostel application, and then they end up in the hostel system and then fall at some of the hurdles in there when they could have actually been getting the interim accommodation, getting their main housing duty and going through that process, but they've been pushed to the hostel application because of difficulties with being verified. And I think it's a real issue, to be honest.
I think you're completely right, because like you say, it's muddying up that low threshold to that ridiculously high threshold. But where do you then stand? And I think there's also then sort of just, again, absolute rubbish. But if someone doesn't get verified because they don't want to be verified, are you then non-engaging? Are you then intentionally sort of refusing help, or are you whatever we see it all the time, don't we? Like, hate the phrase non-engagement. That does happen because what you don't want to be verified, because actually you're having the hardest time of your life and someone's basically saying we don't believe you. And like you say, it's the cost of housing them for the tiniest amount of time. And then if you find them not homeless and they've got a 5-bed mansion down the street, which happens 0.01% of the time, then it's all sorted, it's done. But how are we supposed to sort of like help people or end homelessness if we're not even going to give like people benefit of the doubt?
And the burden of proof is on the council. It's not on the person. Burden of proof is on the council. They shouldn't be saying, or outreach workers or people who may mean well, but they shouldn't be saying, go back to this spot and then we'll come and see you. It really concerns me when they say that, because you might be putting somebody at quite high risk. They might go back to that spot and anything could be happening at that point, and they're like, oh, I could be in danger here, but I better stay here because so and so is coming to see me. It's just it's
and again, like exactly what you're saying, because it's the council telling services, so you can't hold the services to account because they're just fulfilling their contracts. But then if you try to hold the council to account, they're like, well, it's not us, it's the outreach. So like it's again just they've just removed themselves from any sort of accountability.
Just to kind of emphasize, I think there's a few points I just want to just say, just because it's black and white stuff. So Laura just said, that because we've seen it in the training, so housing also say, well, you haven't been verified, so I've got no reason to believe you might be homeless. That just to say categorically, that's just not the way it works. So you see housing also saying that, just complain. and the same, and in one sense, what what Shannon's saying in terms of so those who aren't verified, well, they're still homeless. So why are they not being advised to make homeless applications? They might just be sofa surfing. So what? So they should still be approaching the local authority, making a homeless application. So the outreach team should be for those who I'd be interested to know for the outreach teams individuals who aren't verified and they say, well, they're just sofa surfing. What do they actually do with that person? Because there's a lot they could do with that person. In one sense, to stop them being at risk of rough sleeping down the line, because it's nice to help people in it. So I don't know. As I say, I'm sure we'll see the issue come up again. But it does seem if you're in a service or if you're in an area where you have to be verified or there's this nonsense, just it's legally it's an imaginary thing that only exists in the outreach team and the council's heads. You don't need to worry about too much about it if you're trying to get people housed through the homeless application route. Does anyone? So we've massively overrun. Sorry, guys. Does anyone have any kind of closing thoughts or anything you want to say? I know there's a question come in there, which I think we'll have to roll over till next week. So anyone else got anything you want to say before we close? If you've got this far, guys, please do like and subscribe. There should be a little box down in the bottom right corner, a little red one. Just click on that to subscribe. And just from a selfish point of view, me and Shannon, we've got some training coming up. So I think the 29th of September, I think, is almost full, but the 20th of October, I think, has still got spaces. So do check us out on Eventbrite as well. There's a link on the channel, you'll see. Will and Laura, do you have any news or anything you want to say in terms of that sort of stuff? I'm probably, I don't know if you will do, but just in case you do. No, that's cool. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you very much. I think we're back next week again, usual time. Laura, it'd be great to see you again if you can make it. So, but we'll call the live stream